Bonjour et bienvenue. You are in the right place today if you have come to see Pursuing the Dream, Living and Investing in France with Adrian Leeds. My name is Melissa Sora, and I'm with the Federation of Alliances Françaises USA. We work with the over 100 Alliances Françaises chapters in the US, and we are the largest network of Alliances Françaises chapters in the world, helping over 25,000 learners of French each year. If you go to our website, afusa.org, you will find contact details for all the Alliances Françaises chapters in the US, and you will see the other cultural events that we have coming up over the next few months. In September, we still have Jacques Villeglé next week, and then Chef Alain Lenôtre, who will show us how to make a chocolate lava cake. After that, we have Sandra Smith, who's the translator of Irene Nemirovsky's novels, including Master of Souls, who will talk to us about the art of translation. And then Alain Lenôtre comes back again to show us how to make a tarte nougat pomme. And again, all of these are free to Alliances Françaises members across the US, as well as AATF members, and you can sign up on afusa.org.
Melissa, that sounds awfully delicious.
Chef Lenôtre's recipes are always delicious. So we ask you today to please stay on mute during the presentation and stay on speaker view. You can put your questions in the chat, and Patty and I will be looking at those throughout the presentation. If you have any technical issues, if Zoom boots you out, just log back in using the original link, excuse me. And the event today is being recorded. It will run for 1 hour. And now I have the pleasure of introducing Adrian Leeds. Adrian has lived in France for over 28 years. You might know her as HGTV's top French agent on their popular TV show, House Hunters International. Adrian is a French property expert, published journalist, and author. She arrived in Paris herself as an expat in 1994 and specializes in helping other expats in their quest to fulfill their dream to live in France. Her company, the Adrian Leeds Group, is a licensed real estate agency offering complete property consultation services primarily for North Americans and other Anglophones wanting to live and/or invest in France. We've been fortunate to have Adrian share her expertise in in-person events with many of our AF chapters in the US, and for the past 3 years, also on Zoom for our national and international audience. Merci beaucoup et bienvenue, Adrian.
Melissa, thank you so much. It's so sweet of you. That was quite a very nice introduction, and I'm very, very pleased to be here. I am going to go ahead and share my screen and my PowerPoint presentation, if that's okay with everyone. And here we go. We're going to talk about how to escape to France. Escape to France 101. So first of all, let me just give you an idea about who we are, because we're a little bit different than the average real estate agency. We are property consultants, and so we work primarily for the buyer. We like to think of ourselves as French property the American way, because we're basically by Americans for Americans. And when I say Americans, I really include North Americans. We also do quite a lot of work with Australians and New Zealanders, but we leave the Europeans pretty much to themselves. And we are a licensed real estate agency in France. Our services include property consultation, property search, property sales and listings. We do some purchase and sales assistance as well. So if you were to find your own property but needed help through that process, we can do that. We do appraisals. We have financing resources, and we have resources for renovation and decoration. The reason that I have a job and we even exist is because basically there is no multiple listing service in France. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later, but that's a big deal because that changes everything. The process here is different. The laws are different. Of course, the language is different. You're dealing in a different currency. You're dealing in a different culture. So everything you can imagine is different. You know, you can take everything you ever knew about real estate in North America, throw it out the window and start over, because this is just a different game completely. how I got here. I got here, oh, like most people, I came to Paris. I fell in love. It was 1979. The city just called to me like it often does to lots of people. And we came year after year after year until one day, my then husband and I decided it was time to at least come for 1 year and test the waters. Well, that was 28 years ago. I just celebrated that anniversary. And I can tell you that once you land and if you spend a year here, you are not leaving. Now, I did a really dumb thing, okay? I did not speak any French. I had not taken any lessons. I figured I would land here, take an intensive course, and be fluent in 3 months. Ha, ha, ha. That is a big fat joke. So I'm going to tell you right now that I would go get those lessons at the Alliance Française as fast as you can, because you cannot learn this language in 3 months. After a year, I thought maybe it would take 3 years. After 3 years, I thought maybe it would take 10 years. After 10 years, I thought maybe 30 years. Okay, it's 28 years in, and I do speak some French, but it still isn't all that great. So I urge you all to, take advantage of the Alliance Française. They're the best in the business. And what happened to me was that I didn't want to spend all my days in Paris in a classroom. I didn't want to come to Paris and be sitting in a class. So now is the right time to do that. One of the ways, though, that I was able to learn French at all was I actually created my own French-English conversation group called Parler Parler. That ran for 20 years, and it was a very organic way of learning the language, but I still don't really read or write very well. So I managed to get by. Fortunately, everything I do is in English. I write in English. My clients are, in English, but I do have to read legalese, and that's pretty complicated. Anyway, get out there and do it. So how did I manage to stay? I had to renew my carte de séjour annually for 10 years until they would grant me the right to acquire a carte de résident. Now, I believe in today's world, after 5 years, you can request a carte de résident, but for whatever reason, they weren't giving that to me. And so I had to find a way of surviving because I didn't have the right to work. So I did development of websites. I wrote the first online restaurant guide to Paris. This is long before all of it, Zagat's and, all the various food sites. It was a PDF called the Leeds Good Value Guide to Paris Restaurants. And then, of course, I started the conversation group. In 2001, I opened the office in Paris for international living. That was a really good start for me. And 3 years later, I ended up starting my own company. And of course, the rest is basically history. So what are some of the benefits of living in France? As I said in the beginning, you move to France, you will never go back. I warn you now, my crystal ball is very, very clear. You do have some taxes which are higher, which are mostly on income. Some taxes are lower, like property taxes are about 1/10 of what they are in the US. But in the end, you just get a lot more for your money. There are fewer rich, fewer poor, a larger middle class, because France offers a very big safety net. And by the way, you need to know this, you are not taxed in France on your retirement income or your investments. So that's a very big plus for retirees. And when you come here with a visa, after 90 days of being here, you can apply for PUMA, P-U-M-A, which are the healthcare benefits that pay up to 70%. And healthcare costs are about 1/10 of what they are in the US, and they are the best. This is the best care you can get in the world. So the other 30% can be paid with what's called a mutuelle top-up insurance. And they're not very expensive. I have a mutuelle that is 100% coverage with no deductible, and it costs me 1,600 euros a year. And I'm about to celebrate a really big birthday, so that's a pretty low cost if you ask me. Now, the right to live in France, to have that is not very complicated. As an American citizen, you are permitted to stay 90 days within any 180-day period without getting a visa. It's called the Visa Waiver Program. If you want to stay between 4 and 12 months, then you need to apply for a long stay visa, and that is called the carte de séjour. There are several different kinds of carte de séjour, and so you really need to be sure you're applying for the right one. It's not complicated because all you need to do is prove that you can support yourself. So you're going to turn in bank statements, tax returns, things of that nature to show that you have enough money, which is based on the French SMIC or minimum wage, and that's only somewhere between 15,000 and 20,000 euros a year. You have to show that you have some kind of accommodations in France. This is something we can help you with, so don't think of it as a catch-22. And you do have to show that you have medical coverage, so it's really just a temporary health insurance policy. We can also assist you with that. You will have to sign a document that says that you're not going to engage in any professional activity during your stay in France. But don't be fooled by that, because what that means is they don't want you to take a job away from a French national. So if you are working remotely and you are working for a US company or US clients and you are paid in the US, just because your tushy is sitting in a chair in France doesn't mean you can't work. So don't assume that anything you do work-wise in France is illegal. It's more about the taxation than anything else. And at this point, I want you to understand not to confuse legal residency with tax residency. Tax residency is where you live 183 days or more a year, or where you consider home. And there is a tax treaty between France and the US, so you don't pay tax twice on the same income. To get a visa, the official website, there's a link here, okay, at the bottom of the screen. And Patty, maybe you can put this link in the chat box. Okay. Patty Sadowskis, would you wave your hand so people can see you? Patty works with us. She's my assistant, and she's going to monitor the questions, and she'll be able to put some links in the chat. So, and you can always contact Patty to reach me as well. Now, speaking the language. Okay, we know French is, come on, it's the most beautiful language there is, right? We all want to be able to speak it. It's not easy. But there is no language requirement to obtain your long stay visa. So don't worry about your level. It does make a lot of difference when it comes to integrating into a truly French lifestyle. You know, when you get to the point where you can joke with the waiter, that means a lot. So you want to get to at least that point, or at least some survival French. As I said earlier, you really want to try to attend the Alliance Française before you hit the ground in France, so that you at least have a good basis before you're here. One of the things, though, to consider is when you think about where you're going to live in France, you might want to be somewhere where you're comfortable with your level of French, meaning that if you're in a city like Paris or Nice and people speak English all around you and your level of French isn't good, then maybe you're going to feel more comfortable. But if you're in the middle, of a tiny French village and everyone there is French and they're not going to speak English, you might feel uncomfortable if your level's not good. So just consider that. You need to practice speaking whenever you can. It doesn't just come out of your mouth. You have to actually use it. And there's a saying in French, la meilleure façon d'apprendre une langue étrangère est sur l'oreiller, meaning the best way to learn a language is on the pillow. And I assume all of you know what that really means. Now, let's talk about France. There's an awful lot of France to love. I haven't found a place in France I don't love, quite honestly. There are some places I, enjoy more than others, but everything is there for you. If you are really into Paris, then you can expect an urban lifestyle and a higher cost of living than the rest of the country. That higher cost of living is really primarily in your housing, because most other things are about the same price. Maybe restaurants are a little bit more in Paris than other things, but it's really pretty much based on housing. One of the big advantages, though, to Paris is that you have a good public transportation system, so you don't need to own and operate a car, and that's the big savings, so maybe it balances out. In Nice and along the Riviera, you have a kind of a combination of both urban and suburban lifestyles, so you can choose, and the cost of living is a little bit more moderate. That's the photo on the upper right. That is a view of Cap Ferrat from Villefranche-sur-Mer. I call that the $1 million view. It's drop dead gorgeous. Okay, now, if you're going to go into Provence, the region of Provence, which is very popular with Americans and really beautiful and one of my favorite places, you can have a more rural lifestyle and a more moderate cost of living. But then there's a zillion other fabulous cities and the provinces where there's a combination of urban, suburban, and rural, and a much lower cost of living. Provence is one of the more expensive regions, and so the other regions you will find property less expensive. Did it turn? It didn't go? There we go. There we go. So when it comes to deciding where to live in France, there's an awful lot of wonderful places, but I personally like places that check off these boxes. So number one on my list is a thriving American community. And I hear it all the time from people who say, well, I really want to integrate with the French. I don't really want to be surrounded by Americans. Okay. And that sounds good in theory. In practice, when you have an American community, you will have an immediate group of friends. You will have people you can commiserate with because you're all going through the same problems, issues, cultural crossings, and it really does make a difference to have those people. The other thing is that when you meet other Americans, they're just like you. You're going to make friends really quickly because you're going to be able to relate to these other people. And so I highly recommend considering places that do have a good, thriving American community. Second on my list is transportation. An international airport, which is Paris, Marseille, and Nice, gets you everywhere easily, quickly, inexpensively, without any hassle. So if you want to retire to France and you think you want to travel, then I highly recommend being near an international airport. On top of that, a good TGV hub, that'll get you to a zillion places all over France and Europe. And if there's good local transportation, then you don't need a car, because that's the next item on the list. In order to have a car, or at least to drive, you need to have a French driving license within the first year of having your visa. And getting a French driving license is not easy, and it is expensive. So there are some states in the US that have a reciprocal agreement with France where you trade in your US license for a French license. And if you are lucky enough to be in one of those states, God bless you, that's the best, okay? One particular little trick I'm going to tell you right now, though, if you can do that, then what you want to do is you want to contact your DMV. Tell them you lost your driving license. Let them send you a second one so that when you're in France and you have to turn in one of them, you still have the other one that you can use when you're in the US. So that's just a little trick of the trade. Now, the other thing to consider is, of course, your cost of living, but mostly you're going to find that housing is the number one most different expense you're going to have compared to other parts of the country. And then, of course, it's a question of whether you're going to rent or purchase. For those people who are, as old as me or younger than me, access to good healthcare and hospitals could be very important. So that could mean more metropolitan areas. And then another question for you would be whether you need business opportunities, if that's important, or whether cultural activities are important, and do you want both? Now, again, language, we already talked about that a little bit. Again, where do you want to be where you're comfortable with your level? And last but not least is whether you want to be in an urban environment or a rural environment, or do you want to be living in a village house or a house in the countryside? And these are all things that we can help you decide. So number one is, do you want to rent or buy? And of course, renting gives you a lot of flexibility because, it doesn't cost as much to rent, but you have to realize that you are paying someone else's mortgage. And you can never really make it entirely your own. However, you might want to rent for a year to be sure where you want to buy. And a lot of our clients do that. It also takes so much time to buy a property that you might want to go ahead and rent long-term first, just so you've got the time to look for properties to purchase and go through the whole process. I'm going to go through that a little bit later. Of course, owning your own home gives you a security, and it's considered a long-term investment. And if you really make a good purchase, which is something we would help you do, especially like in Paris, Paris is a non-risk market, then you will have, you'll have a lot of growth in that investment. So it's worth serious consideration. Now, to rent long-term, the leases here are very specific. You can't write your own lease. There's a 1-year lease that carries a 30-day cancellation. And then there's an unfurnished lease, which is 3 years with a 90-day cancellation, except in certain cities where there is a housing shortage, like Paris, like Nice, where, believe it or not, even on a 3-year lease, you can cancel your lease with a 30-day notice. It's pretty amazing. But the laws favor the tenants. Okay, that's why you've got that 30-day cancellation. So the landlords aren't happy about that. And they're not happy because they feel very insecure. And that means that you're going to need to provide the security for them in the form of either a year's worth of rent in an escrow account in a bank, or a guarantor or renter's insurance, which there are a couple companies that provide that. One is called Guarant Me, the other one is called Uncle. And what that does is you take out an insurance policy that actually protects the landlord from you not paying the rent, which seems pretty nutty, but that's the way it works. And rental properties are hard to find, not as hard to find as they are to secure, because the landlords really are nervous about squatters. So they favor people who are salaried, which you may not be, who have an indefinite work contract, and they're concerned about foreigners where they can't really attach your money, which is why they need the security. So just keep in mind that this is a challenge, but we do this all day long. We have found ways to make the landlords feel comfortable. And I will say this, you pretty much have to understand that you're going to have to make some trade-offs. You can't be really picky about the property. You have to almost choose the landlord, because the landlord's choosing you. You're not choosing the apartment. So as long as you're flexible, then we can find you a property pretty quickly. We also do this sight unseen so that we can actually find you an apartment to rent before you move in, before you're, without you having to visit the choices, but you can also come, rent something else temporarily, and do the visits with us if that's what you want to do. We've had a really good track record of finding great properties because we'll do, walkthroughs, videos, photographs. We'll do everything that we need to do to make you feel comfortable. Now, finding a property to purchase is actually easier. Anyone can purchase property in France. You do not need any kind of a visa or there's nothing you need specifically in order to look for a property and purchase it. There is no multiple listing service. Now, what that means is that every agent and agency only has access to their own listings. And in Paris, particularly, they do not expect to split their commissions, which are about 5% included in the asking price. The agents are therefore very proprietary. They don't want to share information, and they really only want to sell what's on their books. So that means they're working for the seller, not the buyer. Now, in the South, particularly in other parts of France, they have a much more open attitude about sharing their commission. And when we have the opportunity to share the commission with the selling agency, we refund that back to the client. So the client could end up costing them very, very little for us to do the job. And I will tell you right now that the agents will do or say just about anything to make a sale. They are not going to tell you what's not good about the property. And we will, because we're working for the buyer, not for the seller. So our primary service is property finding. We can do this anywhere in France. We have a team in Paris. We have a team in Nice, but they are all adept at being able to search just about anywhere in the country. So how do you go about finding financing? This is pretty tough. We do work with brokers who specialize in the North American buyer. And they have to, really, because the banks don't want to lend to Americans. They don't want to lend to Americans because of FATCA, F-A-T-C-A, the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act. These are regulations that are part of the HIRE Act that were enacted in 2010 by Barack Obama. And basically, it places regulations on foreign financial institutions to report their U.S. customers. That has made it difficult and expensive for the financial institutions to have U.S. customers, and so they really don't want to work with us anymore. This is worldwide. This is something we as expats are battling on a daily basis. So those who do lend, okay, they want a client who is 60 years old and younger. And the reason for that is because there is a life insurance policy that is mandatory to secure the mortgage in the event of death. And of course, the premiums become very expensive over the age of 60. So they want the loan to end by the age of 75. So if you're 60 years old and older, then you are no longer a really good candidate. However, there are some circumstances where it works out, and that's usually with private banks. Now, the mortgage payment itself must not exceed more than 1/3 of your disposable income. And the lenders, again, they prefer salaried individuals rather than self-employed, which is, of course, less risky for them. But now is such a great time to take a mortgage because interest rates are still low. They're hovering about 2%. I call that free money. I believe the interest rates in at least the US are double that or more. So getting a French mortgage is definitely an advantage. And as I said, we have brokers who can work with you. And so the first thing to do would be to check out your financing and see if it's possible. Now, right now, oh my goodness, the currency exchange is amazing. You don't want to use your banks. You want to use currency brokers because they charge only about 1% in the spread, which is the difference between the buy and the sell rate, compared to the commercial banks that charge about 3%. But the rate of exchange right now is literally lower than parity. We looked at this yesterday. Patty, are we still at that? Do you know, are we still pretty much at parity? But it's the lowest rate we've had in 20 years. So, you know, if you were to buy, okay, a property a year ago when the rate was 118, if you bought a property worth 500,000 euros, it would have cost you $590,000. But if you buy that property today, it would only cost you $495,000. That is an amazing savings. So now is the time to buy. Patty, did you find out what the rate of exchange was? You're on mute.
It's 101 today.
We went
Gone up a little bit.
Okay, 1% up. We have to do our best. But all of the brokers are saying that it's going to stay really low for a while as long as the dollar is strong. Now, if you want to rent your property on a short-term basis to generate revenue, it's gotten more and more complicated. These laws apply to cities of 200,000 population or more, but each city enforces the laws differently. Now, if it's a primary residence, you can rent your property for up to 120 days short-term without a problem. So once you move here, if you want to rent your property out while you're traveling, that's great. If it's a secondary residence, then you really don't have that much choice. You can either do a long-term lease, which is 1 year, or you can do what's called a mobility lease, which is 1 to 10 months to someone who's here on business or education. That's in Paris. Paris is really tight. Nice has a little bit more flexibility. You can rent short-term for up to 6 years, but your building has to allow the furnished rentals and the city has to approve it. So it's getting a little bit trickier. You can always do a long-term lease. You can always do a mobility lease. And so you can generate a revenue at least with a mobility lease. But if you get caught and the city prosecutes you, then your infraction costs could be 50,000 euros. So you don't really want to take these chances. Now, the purchase process is long. It takes 4 to 6 months from the initial visit to signing of the final deed. We've had a few cases that have taken even more than a year for a variety of reasons, but normal circumstances, 4 to 6 months. Now, the sellers tend to only allow about 5% negotiation room. That's because the price of property is pretty easy to ascertain. It's not very broad because they keep track of this information. You can look up the statistics on a monthly basis. It's all there to be viewed. And the French don't like to negotiate. They don't want to talk about money. They don't want to haggle. So you can pretty much assume that you've only got about 5% negotiation room. And the seller is morally obligated to accept asking price. That means that there are no bidding wars. That does not happen. That keeps the price of property pretty level, so it's not going to balloon. What happens is once you've negotiated the price, then the notaire, who is the transactional lawyer, is notified and begins the process to organize all the documentation, which takes a long time because he or she has to organize a whole lot of material, and that takes about a month. Then a pre-sale agreement is signed, which is either a promesse or a compromis de vente. Those are two different kinds of documents, but they're very similar. And they are signed only once all the due diligence is done. We help our clients do that due diligence. And at that time, a 10% deposit is held in escrow by the notaire. Once that document is signed, in which we can do long distance, that you don't have to be in person. And now we're doing Zoom like this, we're doing video conferencing, which makes it, it's fabulous because it really doesn't matter where you are. You can participate in that signing. There is a 10-day cooling off period within which you can actually fully retract your purchase. So there's a lot of consumer protection built in. Once that's signed, you need to allow 2 to 4 months between the signature of the pre-sale agreement and the final deed. And I'd allow even more for financing, because if you have a mortgage, it takes a lot more to gather all the paperwork and for the bank to do their job. So that's why I said it's an easy 4 to 6 month process. Now, how do we make a difference? Well, we represent you, your interests only, and that's really important. I like to think of it as a kind of insurance because we do our best to never let a client make a bad decision. We're the ones out there searching for the property on behalf of either the renter or the buyer, so you're not doing the legwork. We're providing all the resources, all the professionals, all the advisors. We're doing all the due diligence, and the documents are in French, so it means you don't need to do expensive translations. And we manage the process from beginning to end, so you don't have to think too hard. All you have to do is sit back and let us tell you when we need you to do something for us. So it's pretty simple. In general, we not only offer all of that, we offer some things for our community. We like to give back to the community. I write 3 nouvelles lettres a week, Monday and Wednesday and Thursdays. Mondays and Wednesdays are pretty much lifestyle pieces. They could be about anything. Thursday is French Property Insider, which is specifically about property, although it can be pretty broad. And then, of course, if you've seen us on House Hunters International, I've just recently filmed my 50th episode, and I'm about to film my 51st coming up in next week, as a matter of fact. One of the other things you can do is attend our monthly après-midi coffee gathering in Paris, which is the second Tuesday of every month, except for August. And author Lynn Heyman is speaking this coming Tuesday from 3 to 5 p.m. at a cafe in the Marais. So if you want to attend, just go to the website and go under events, and you'll find more information about that. You can also attend our conferences. We have a conference and a tour coming up. This is next week. It's next Friday, the 16th. And we still have space for the conference, probably not for the tour, but for anyone who wishes to attend. It's in Nice. It's 3 days. It's going to be a lot of fun, a lot of information, and it's really worthwhile. You can also book a personal or group consultation with me, one-on-one. I do them just about every single day from 4 to 6 p.m. And I've never had anyone tell me that it wasn't worth gold, because I can move someone ahead very quickly by looking at what their situation is and really strategizing on the best path. And then, of course, a great way to learn things is just by participating in webinars like this one. Now, the group consultation we have coming up is October 4th and October 7th. We have a couple of slots open. We're doing a minimum of 3 people with a maximum of 6. It's a Zoom conversation, just like we're having, except it's, much more intimate. And we get to exchange a lot of information. It's really worthwhile, and we're charging 130 dollars, same thing, dollars or euros for that session. So if you want to sign up, you just want to email us, and you can email us at either info@adrianleeds.com or general@adrianleeds.com, and we will be happy to help you. And now is an opportunity for you guys to just about ask anything you want to ask. And I'm going to stop my share.
Adrian?
See you
Adrian, I'm going
guys.
to interrupt you. There was one other thing you wanted to cover, and we were going to talk about fractional property ownership.
Oh, we were.
We're going to cover that for a minute. Yep.
We were, but I tell you what, why don't we let someone ask about that? Is there anyone in the audience that wants to know about fractional ownership?
Nobody has questions. Okay. None of that question hasn't come up in the chat. I know that.
Okay, well, when it does, we'll answer it. How's that?
And I've answered a lot of questions directly. Andrew's got some questions about your comments about the driver's license, about asking for the duplicate.
The duplicate? Well, that's that's something you do with your own DMV, the Department of Motor Vehicles. You just basically let them know that you lost it. They send you a new one.
And actually, I mean, if you have a French license, you can drive in the US with it.
Yes,
But I know a
that's
lot of
true, but
people
it's-
are more comfortable keeping the US license. And they do ask for the duplicate. Is it 100% legal? Maybe not, but
You
it
know, I
makes
don't
people
know
more
the answer to
comfortable.
that.
It makes people more
I
comfortable
don't-
having that.
I don't know if
having
that's
that
100%
license.
legal or not, but I think it's probably practical.
Practical, right,
So,
right. Yep,
I take my chances is what I would
Right.
do.
right. One question we have is, do all cash purchases take less time?
No, they would take less time if it's a cash purchase, normally speaking, but there could be other factors that would take more time. Wouldn't have anything to do with whether it was cash or not. So there'd be other reasons.
And another question just came in from Alan. For people who are retired, age 70 and above, what are the options? Is it best to rent? So this is a renting versus buying option.
Well, that depends on the individual.
Exactly.
I mean, if you're, you know, if you don't want to like start dealing with property ownership, then just don't, you know. But when you rent, you're renting someone else's property and you can't really make it entirely your own. But there is a certain amount of freedom with that because you can move in 30 days with a cancellation, and you know you're not stuck with dealing with all the issues of a property. When you have a problem with the hot water tank, you call your landlord. So, and then the property's only as good as the landlord. That's
Exactly.
the bottom line.
Exactly. Okay, so someone did ask, what is a fractional share? There's your chance.
Fractional
There's your
ownership.
chance.
Okay, fractional ownership is not timeshare. Timeshare is when you actually only buy the time, the usage in a property. In this case, fractional ownership is when there are two or more owners of one property and then they share in the usage. That's the general definition. We are developing fractional ownership properties mostly in Paris and in Nice and environs. And we have a set kind of a calendar, a usage calendar, which I think is quite amazing. It's 13 owners who each have 4 weeks of usage. And it's 2 weeks and then 6 months later, 2 weeks. And then it rotates by 10 weeks going forward, so that every year you have 2 different seasons, and that those dates change every year. So over the course of 13 years, you have then done every possible week. And you can trade your weeks with the other owners of that property at any time. You can let your family and friends stay there. If 2 owners who want 4 weeks together, if they buy share letters that are adjacent to one another, then they just trade their 2 weeks so that they can each have 4. And these properties that we develop, we buy them, we renovate them to the nines. Martine Di Matteo is our primary decorator, and she does an absolutely gorgeous job. We set everything up so that there's really nothing for you to do other than to bring your suitcase with your clothing, unpack, and have a wonderful time. So it's a way of sharing with these other 12 owners all of the hassles, all of the expense. And you never need to rent a short-term apartment again. So if you come to Paris or to Nice and you want to stay a few weeks a year, it's an ideal way of parking your money in a good investment. The resale on the shares is good. We've never had a resale that was less than the original purchase. They've always made a profit. And so, it's just a great way to park your money and have fun. So I hope that's in a nutshell.
Okay, I'm just trying to pick out interesting questions here. Okay, from Catherine, If a friend buys an apartment that we share, can they gift it to me or transfer it in their will?
Yes, but there will be inheritance taxes to pay. So it's, of course you can, but just know that the inheritance taxes are expensive.
And
But
there
of
may
course, you can gift your share, you can bequeath your share, you can do whatever you want with your share.
but this is just a general apartment. I mean,
Yeah, but either way,
right.
even in a general apartment, if two people buy an apartment together and you do it in the name of an SCI, which is this French property company called a Société Civile Immobilière, and you each have 50-50 shares in it, for example, then you can do whatever you want with those shares.
And another question about how much cash should one plan on having up front? What percentage is the down payment? How much are notarial taxes and fees, etc.?
Okay, good question. The notarial taxes and fees are about 7 to 7.5%. And that is not something you can borrow, so you need to have that in cash. And there's nothing you can do about it. It's highly regulated. The banks are doing traditionally right now either 50 to 70% loan to value. So that means you need 30 to 50% down plus the notarial taxes and fees. Okay.
Okay, if you buy in France, is it easier to get a long-term visa?
Doesn't matter.
Exactly.
Nope.
Oh, okay. Here's a good question that just came in. Other than learning French, what are some things someone can do to prepare for a move, even if they are several years out? Do you have any book recommendations related to property buying or relocation? And I know the first thing that came to my mind was learning about the cultural differences. That's the first thing that came to my mind.
Exactly. Oh my goodness. Okay. The hardest thing is crossing the cultural divide. Okay. It's harder than language. It's harder than any of the hoops you have to go through. So I would start with Demystifying the French by Janet Hull Strand. Okay, I would read The Bonjour Effect by Jean-Benoit Nadeau and Julie Barlow. I would get my hands on anything cultural. Books about what we do, there's a whole slew of books out there, but they're really not going to help you ultimately because it's too individual. Your situation is individual, and we can help you make those decisions better. But and I can't actually even think of a book that I'd recommend on that. Not really. Can you, Patty?
No, because as you mentioned, the situation's very individual.
Right. I mean, there's a lot of information online. I don't recommend crowdsourcing, by the way, because you can really get confused.
Mm-hmm.
I really think it's best to stick with professionals who know what they're doing and not crowdsource from everybody out there who think they know what they're doing, but don't necessarily. Next.
Now that the questions are coming in fast and furious. Okay, one that just came in, I think this was in here earlier. We heard that all Americans trying to get a French mortgage need to buy an apartment that costs 500,000 euros or more to be eligible for the mortgage.
It's not true, but I will tell you that they really don't want to lend small amounts of money. I mean, the truth is that the banks are at 2% interest. They're not making much money. So it's not worth it to them to do the same amount of work for a small mortgage as it is for a large mortgage. So there's no real number. It's not like it's 500,000 is like the line drawn, but it is true that the more you want to borrow, the easier it is to get the mortgage. And we all know that the people who get the mortgages easiest are the people who don't need the money. That is the way it works.
Very true. And what is the average length of a mortgage?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, because they don't want you to go beyond the age of 75, if you're 60, you're not likely going to get more than a 10 or 15-year mortgage. Max is 25 years.
And we've had a couple questions about, can Americans open a bank account?
Yes, they can, but not easily.
Right.
Okay. We have developed relationships with banks that will open accounts for Americans. We offer it as a service. But you cannot just walk into a bank and just put on a big smile and say, I want to open an account. They only do things by appointment, and they really have to be specialists at this point, and they have to go through all the hoops that the US has imposed on them, and that's not fun for them. So it's best to just let us do the introduction.
Okay, and we have a couple questions about the timing of finding a long-term rental.
That could be a day, it could be a week, it could be a month, it could be 6 weeks, but basically because there's a 30-day cancellation, your window to find these properties is pretty much 6 weeks, because they want to fill them right away. So, you know, if it's on the market now, they want to write up the lease right away. We tell most of our clients who are getting a visa that they should get their visa first and then let us know. And that's when we start the apartment process, their search process. It's the most logical thing.
And is one time of year better than another to look?
No, but there are some times of the year that are not good to look. Everybody wants September 1. And everybody's gone in August. So that means that if you want a September 1 property, you have to start looking in June, but it's difficult. And so that is, you know, that's like the worst time of year just because you've got a lot of competition. Also right around Christmas, just because people are on holiday. Otherwise, the rest of the year is great.
Let me see what else we want to ask here. They're coming in so fast, it's hard to keep up.
Well, I see one that's, don't you need an address in France to get a visa? Yeah, you do. But yeah. we provide this on your behalf. We have ways of doing it. I think
right.
I have
for our search clients.
Yes, our search clients. I have hundreds of people who live with me. And for some reason, the prefecture hasn't caught on yet. So far it's working.
so far it's working. But we will provide you proof of accommodations for your visa application if you're one of our search clients.
So right. Don't worry about this catch-22.
Right, and in the same, and as Adrian said too, we can help you with that bank account.
Exactly.
Okay, let's see.
Good questions. These are good questions.
I know they are.
Uh-huh.
Somebody had a question about the new energy ratings required for rentals. And I'm going to jump in and answer that. And it's basically, I mean, it depends on the owner. As a renter, that doesn't really matter to you. But I know that apartments have to meet certain energy requirements after a certain date.
Yes, they're going to have to upgrade. This is really a big problem for the landlords.
Yeah,
because it might mean that they have to put in new windows, which are expensive, or whatever. It's good for everyone overall, of course. But as a renter, if you don't care, then you don't care.
And there were a couple questions about, can you buy property and Airbnb it, which you covered a little bit.
I basically covered that. If you buy a property and you are a primary resident and you're living here, then you can rent short term. And that, I assume that's what you mean by Airbnb. Mm-hmm. I want everybody to understand what that term means. Airbnb is like Kleenex. All that, okay, Airbnb is just a platform that connects a landlord with a tenant. That's all it is. Okay. You can have an Airbnb that is 1 week or 1 month or 1 year. It doesn't matter. It's not necessarily a short-term rental. That's the term you want to use, short-term rental. So if you are an owner and you're living in that property more than 183 days a year and it's your primary residence, then you can legally rent it up to 120 days a year. No problem. If it is a secondary residence, then you cannot legally rent it short term. You can rent it on a mobility lease, which is 1 to 10 months to someone who's there on business or education, or long term. But that only applies to cities of 200,000 or more. And each of those cities then enforces this law differently. So be careful. You just want to do your research. That's the main thing. We've got 5 minutes left. Pick some good questions, Patty.
Is the no Terrace fee the same if one buys in cash?
Yep. No Terrace fees are highly regulated, have nothing to do with what the purchase, how the purchase is being made, nothing.
Okay, another question. Is there a threshold property value above which wealth tax is applicable? And what is that threshold? Do you know? You should know.
Yeah, it's 1,300,000. It's 1,300,000. Okay, is the threshold on wealth tax, and those are your assets in France or your worldwide assets if you are resident in France.
Mm-hmm. And some of these topics we also cover in our financial forums.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll put a link in the chat.
Well, I see one that says if you're married and one person's older, does the age requirement apply to the older partner? They will consider the younger partner. You know, they will take a look at the younger partner. That could make a big difference when it comes to a mortgage. Mm-hmm. Any others? I see one. What about Airbnb in small towns? Let me give you one example. Villefranche-sur-Mer, for example, which is just, east of Nice. It has a pretty good rental market, pretty year round, mostly because of the language school that's there. But, and it does not fall into the 200,000 category. So it is one of those places where you could successfully rent short term. So that's just one idea, for example.
Mm-hmm. Adrian, and a follow-up to the question about the age of the borrowers, does that mean that the younger partner must have a high enough income on their own?
I don't know how to answer that question, actually, because I'm not the bank.
You're not the bank, right?
I'm not the broker. And these are things that are changing constantly. Kim Bingham, who was our preferred broker, she just recently wrote us about a whole lot of things that were happening in the industry, which I wrote about in one of my newsletters. So, it could be at a whim. At one point, the banks had so few agents that they couldn't handle the number of applications, and they just flat out said, we're not even looking at them, forget it, because they couldn't handle it. And it's been a bit of a nightmare ever since COVID. There are other ways, by the way, to finance your property through lines of credit on the US side. We work with a financial advisor named Brian Dunhill Financial. He's brilliant, and he can maybe help you through that scenario, a line of credit. There are also private banks that are willing to lend as long as you invest in their bank. So there are some creative solutions. I would not close the door on this. We just have to ask the questions.
Mm-hmm.
And we're down to 1 minute. What's the last question?
How far in advance of a move should someone schedule a consultation?
As soon as possible. Do not wait until you're already too far along. Mm-hmm. The faster we get to talk, the cleaner your path is going to be open. You'll know
Exactly.
exactly what you need to do and how you need to do it, and then you can schedule it as you like. But I would not sit on your hands till the last minute at all. No. Well, on that note, I would like to say thank you to everyone. And if you want, unmute and say hello.
Hey,
Thank
merci
you,
à vous,
everyone.
Adrian.
Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. Thank you, Patty.
Thank you to everyone for being here. This has
Taking
been
time out on your
recorded.
Saturday.
Right, exactly. And you can watch it again through the recording. Thank you to Melissa, the Alliance Française Federation. This has been a delight and a pleasure. And I certainly hope it's been helpful to everyone. So have a great weekend.
Great. Thank you,
Merci.
everybody.
Bon
Bye-bye.
weekend. Au revoir.